Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your moderator for this afternoon's Color of Conversation, Senior Vice President of Inclusive Content and Engagement for National Geographic Content, Karen Greenfield.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. How are you? I am so honored to share this space with you to talk about these two amazing films and to share the stage with some phenomenal filmmakers and producer. So I bring to the stage, I want to make sure I get their accolades right, so forgive me for reading. I don't want to miss a thing. Emmy-nominated director Tracy A. Curry, who also directed Nat Geo's Hurricane Katrina, Race Against Time. We also have National Sports Emmy Award winner, director Julian Gooden, and he is the director of ESPN's Above the Tide 20 years later. Last but certainly not least, we have film subject of ESPN's Above the Tide 20 years later, ESPN commentator, Emmy-nominated Outstanding Hosted Editorial Series for a Podcast, Super Bowl champion, and Louisiana native Ryan Clark. How y'all feeling?
Good. Nervous.
Don't be nervous, don't be nervous. Thank you all for coming to talk about these two important, amazing films. I am proud to be an employee of National Geographic and the Walt Disney Company in partnership with ESPN to bring this conversation to you today. So we're just gonna jump into it. Most recently, the series Hurricane Katrina, Race Against Time, we revisit the events leading up to, during, and the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina and the voices of those who lived through the disaster. My colleagues at ESPN are releasing a new ESPN E60 Above the Tide 20 years after Katrina on Monday, August 11th, where Super Bowl champion and Louisiana native Ryan Clark returns to New Orleans to explore the storm's lingering impact on the people and examine how the New Orleans Saints restored hope. So I want each of you, before we roll the trailers of each of these films, I want each of you to set the stage, if you will. Give us context around each of your films, your projects, and tell us how each of these films are different from other Hurricane Katrina recounts.
Yeah, so for our series, the assignment that I was given was to tell a story that revisits the events of Hurricane Katrina, or everything that we've come to know was contained within that, because obviously we know it wasn't the storm. 20 years later, with 20 years of hindsight, perspective, what is there new that we maybe didn't understand at the time that we know now? And so when I started the series, I happened to have been at Essence Festival that summer promoting another series. And knowing that I was going to start doing this, I was like, I'm just going to talk to people who are from here to kind of get their understanding about what there is to know. And so I just started speaking to people that I was meeting, like the person that was driving my Uber, the lady that was doing my makeup, the people that were working at the convention center. And while nobody who lived through Katrina is jumping to revisit or tell anybody this profound trauma that they experienced, because it was such a profound trauma, it's still right there at the surface for so many people. And so people were very forthcoming sort of with their thoughts and their stories and their opinions. And there was one thing that really kind of emerged across all of these different people that I was talking to. And what they were saying was that for those of you who experience New Orleans as a visitor, you come here, you do the Mardi Gras, you do the Essence Festival, Jazz Fest, Bourbon Street, whatever it may be, and New Orleans feels like the New Orleans that you always understood it to be, or it matches the New Orleans of your imagination. But for those of us who are of this place and lived through this, they kind of communicated to me this bifurcated experience of their New Orleans, which is before Katrina and after Katrina. And I think there's a way that in the last couple decades, we've kind of remembered it as something that happened to America, and it wasn't something that happened to America. It was something that happened very specifically to these people in this place in ways that continue to reverberate in their lives today. So that let me know that there's something that they have to teach the rest of us about what Katrina means 20 years later, and that really informed the approach to the series.
So through the lens of all who survived it.
Yes.
Solely.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Julian.
Yeah, so my film focuses on the New Orleans Saints in the first home game back after Katrina. You know, to your point, when they brought me the project, ESPN said, hey, we want to do something on Katrina. You know, I didn't know really how to approach it, and I thought Ryan would be a great addition to the film because if you know East 60, there's normally a reporter component. So I said, you know, we all know how great Ryan is doing interviews, but he's a New Orleans native. So I presented it to him. He said yes, and we were on our way. But I didn't, even though it was an ESPN doc, I didn't want to really focus on the game because I felt like I didn't want people to think that like we were trying to say that the game saved the city. But after talking to people, they just really expressed how important that game meant to the city, to the people, to the community. And so ultimately, what the film is about, it leads up to that special moment in 2006 when the Saints came home. Yeah.
And Ryan, how was it for you going back home and helping to tell that story that Julian just described?
Yeah, I think the coolest part of what we got to do is, you know, there's no perseverance without resilience. There's no resilience without trial. And so we got to tell the story of who the people of New Orleans are, not just were. And then the other piece of it is the football team and sports bringing the city back is this sort of climax of triumph. But we also had to lead with tragedy because for people who lived through it, for people who've never gone back, Hurricane Katrina is not all about a block punt. It's not all about a Super Bowl trophy. It's about all the things that transpired before that that forever changed the city and forever changed the people who are the fabric of that city. And much like we've already spoken about, for people who visit New Orleans, all of those places are actually probably better for tourists and visitors and party goers than they were before the hurricane. Everything else is different. Most of that is worse. And for the people there are people who never wanted to leave New Orleans, right? I'm talking about not to vacation, not to visit other places, who've never moved back. And there's tragedy in that, and there's sadness in that. And then there's also the fact that those same people have Saints flags in their yards in Atlanta, that have Saints flags in their yards in Houston. And so telling the story about the team coming back and Steve Gleason's block punt also told part of how their tragedy ended in triumph. And I thought it was, for me, cathartic in a way, but I was also learning because I was in Washington when it happened.
Right. And that's a great segue. You all have set up the picture beautifully. Let's take a look. It's absolutely incredible to watch that. I've watched both of those trailers numerous times, and each time I find something new. I get goosebumps, I get emotional, just like I'm sure all of you are experiencing now. And what's incredible is that these two films complement each other very well. Julian, you sort of give us the context of what New Orleans was before the storm. And then Tracy, you take us through what happens after the storm. But I think one of the themes that I want us to talk about today is, you know, there were a line in each of your trailers that struck me. And one is a city you cannot drown. The other, the levees broke, the systems broke, but the people did not. Can you shed some light on how these themes play out in each of your films? Start with Tracy.
Okay. Yeah, I think, and like Ryan got at this and what he was saying earlier in terms of these ties of kinship and community that exist in New Orleans in a way that is like was very special to this place because New Orleans at that time, before Katrina, had one of the lowest rates of transients in the country, which is to say, if you were from New Orleans, you tended to not leave, or if you left, you came back. And so what that meant was your block, whatever block you were on, your grandma was over there, auntie's there, cousins over there, your uncles, everybody's there together. And so there were these very, very close ties of kinship and community that people had in that city. And the way the narrative of Black folks in New Orleans was portrayed at the time was that people had descended into this sort of predatory, subhuman behavior. And of course, there's going to be, as we'll hear General Honore say if you watch the series, a lot of stupid shit was going on. But
when
that was
they
not
watch the series.
When you watch the series, but that was not the story, right? Like that type of behavior happens when people have too much to drink and their favorite sports team loses, right? The story on the people of New Orleans, the true story, was that those ties of kinship and community in a circumstance where people had every reason to completely fall apart did not break. People showed up for each other. They showed up for themselves inside the Superdome, on the highway. Like wherever people were, they stayed true to who they truly were. And so that really is one of the narratives that was like most important that we draw out in the story that we told in the series.
I'm gonna let Ryan answer that question about that line. I'm gonna tell you why. Because I wrote something else, and I said, Ryan, it ain't that good. Can you write something? And he wrote that line. And I thought it was the perfect line. And one thing I'll say is I got a little pushback on that line. And so you remember this. And I sent it to Ryan. He said, nope, don't change it. Then I sent it to Ed Buckles, who's in our film. He did a documentary called Katrina Babies. And I sent it to him. And I said, I'm getting pushback on this line. I'm not from New Orleans, so what do you think? He said, it's perfect, don't change it. It's perfect,
Right.
Do not change that line.
Right.
So,
Right.
I'll let you speak.
Yeah, like just as the line goes, Julian said I wrote it. I didn't write it. He texted me. He's like, hey, I didn't like the way he had written a spoken word thing. Clearly, I'm not good at it. Like, it was written well. I just didn't do it well. And so he was like, hey, can you just, he's gave me 4 things to say. He's like, make sure you try to include these things. And he's like, and you just go. And I did it one time. I was at my parents' house, actually. My parents still live there. And I was in my old room, matter of fact. And I was sitting on the bed, and I just recorded it. And I sent it to him. And I fully expected him to be like, hey, can you do it again? Can you include this? And he was like, that's perfect. And I think that, to me, that was the beauty of it, was that like everything I got an opportunity to say when asked a question or when asking questions, I could say we, and I could say our, and I could say us. And that was exactly the feeling that everybody had when we spoke about what that time was like. And, she talked about the connectivity of the city. The connectivity is the people. That's right. And a lot of those people look like us, right? A lot of the people that you saw on the screen look like us. And it was a time, and as crazy as he is, right? When Kanye was like, George Bush hates black people, right? There was a time it felt like that because it seemed like this country that could come to the aid of other people and that could do all of these amazing things when it wants to, couldn't help those people.
Right.
And when you're walking down the street with Leonard Fournette and he's telling you where they stole the boat so they could get to the bridge, but then saying, but we barbecued and we gave food to these people and we gave food to these people, and then those people would go off and they would get water. It was the sense of like, if we're going to survive, we're going to have to survive together. And this ugly picture was painted of a beautiful people that were just trying to live. And I think that was what was cool about getting to go on the journey of talking to everybody.
And what you all just described is authenticity at its finest, right? Ryan, you said just being able to say we and our and us because you're from there, right? There's a cultural competence that comes when we make films about our people, and knowing that what was needed was for people to tell their own stories and not stories told for them. And Ryan, you mentioned, it felt like, America didn't like black people because of that. There's a scene in Race Against Time where someone realized that black people standing on a roof, they weren't getting rescued. And the strategy was, we'll put white people on the roof, and help came 15 minutes later, right? that's in the film, but you gave voice to those people because mainstream media didn't tell us those stories, right? We didn't see that, at least I don't recall seeing that in the news. And so that's the beauty of these films is we're examining the trauma through those who lived it. We're not outsiders telling the story. Julian, can you talk to us about the balance? You talked about trying to set the stage of what New Orleans was before the storm and capturing the beauty and spirit of the people, of the culture that we all know and love of New Orleans, but also realizing that you wanted to also focus on that first game in September, bringing the New Orleans Saints back to the Superdome. How did you make that balance, create that balance for us?
Well, I think working for a sports network, you have a goal, and the goal is to include a sports thread throughout your documentary, your piece, whatever you're doing. And so I knew I had to get to this point, but, thankful to our team, they let me tell the story out the way I wanted to tell it. And it was vitally important for me to not only talk about the storm, but to talk about the people and the culture and to celebrate the culture. I wanted when New Orleans natives to watch it, wow, there's trauma. I want them to feel a sense of pride at some point in the film. And, I was able to do that before the film and just set up what New Orleans was. There's a great scene in the doc with Ryan talking to his daughter, who was born in 2020. Mm-hmm. And he said, you don't know. 2005, I'm sorry.
Definitely ain't got one that young, though.
I'm sorry. Yes.
Talk about correcting the narrative. Yes, that's
ain't no
that's a
COVID
correction
babies
right
around
Thank you.
here. None of that.
He corrected me a lot on the during the shoot. 2005, and he said, the New Orleans that wasn't the New Orleans that we lived in, and for her to be able to watch this and get a little bit of what it was like was important to me. And then obviously, we had to get into what happened. A lot of the same characters are in our film. One is Shelton. Yeah. And Shelton, he was in the Superdome. He recorded all that footage in the Superdome.
Well, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
At least for Nat Geo's series, a lot of it was Sheldon's footage. Yes. And without his footage, we wouldn't be able to dispel some of those lies that
they
were
definitely told y'all cut y'all
mainstream.
phones off. I heard them say it.
All right, please mute your phones. We wouldn't have been able to actually see what really happened in the Superdome and how we cared for one another, how we helped one another, the songs that were sang, the prayers that were prayed, all together. That wasn't the story that mainstream media told us, right? So what's important for both of these films is giving the narrative back to the people, the story back to the people. And that is why both of these films are so important. I want to get into race and socioeconomics. You can't talk about Hurricane Katrina without talking about race and socioeconomics before and after the storm. In Above the Tide, Michael Eric Dyson gives us context into why some people stayed and didn't evacuate. We heard in mainstream media, why did people stay? I don't understand why they just didn't evacuate. And what you will learn in these films is they were given less than 24 hours. And let's keep it real, it was at the end of the month, right? Let's keep in mind it was August 28th. A lot of people didn't have the resources. They were waiting a couple of days to just be able to buy groceries. 27% of New Orleans is at the poverty level. And in New Orleans, generations of people lived in the same neighborhood around the corner. So leave and go where? When your entire family, 3 and 4 generations, are right there on the same street or at least a couple of blocks away. 80% of the city was underwater. 200,000 people could not return. So when we talk about rebuilding and reclaiming the narrative, rebuilding isn't just about infrastructure, right? Tracy, can you talk about what the rebuilding of trust in the systems, the rebuilding of hope, the rebuilding of health, physical health, mental health. Can you talk about what you learned in directing this film?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I was really stressing from the beginning of this series that I wanted to be a theme throughout is the agency that people in New Orleans had, that there was this sort of portrayal of just this mass of just Black neediness. And all throughout, people were showing up for themselves. People that just got a boat and rescued their neighbor. Even a scene we have where someone's trapped in the attic while the water's rising, and she has a moment of faith. That also is an act. That also is an expression of agency. And so in the recovery and the rebuilding, that continued. And I wish we had like 5 more episodes because there was so much more that we could have said. But so much of that, like I think the way that the recovery was portrayed at the time, and there was some truth to this, was that there were all these people coming from elsewhere to save the people of New Orleans. You had volunteers descending upon the city. Brad Pitt built a bunch of houses in the lower Ninth Ward that are all falling apart now, but that's a whole other story. No shade, sorry, he meant well. But the story that I think a lot of people miss is that so much of that rebuilding and recovery began with the people themselves. One of the people that we have in the series, Alice Craft, who's from the lower Ninth Ward, she scraped whatever little reasons, she's lived in a FEMA trailer, and scraped whatever resources that she could together to open the first health clinic in the lower Ninth Ward, offering health care to people in the lower Ninth Ward. And you have to think about, after Katrina, there were all kinds, like there's an official sort of death number, but there's something else called excess deaths, right? Because people are wading through the water with all kinds of nasty chemicals and stuff in there. There were illnesses that people had. Mental illness was a thing. The newspapers were full of reports of suicides and the obituary. These are the things that nobody talks about, like that are not part of the official number. And she, with her meager resources, she lost everything. She lost everything. Pulled it together and started that health clinic. Another person in our series, the older man with the dreads that you see, Malik Rahim. Malik is a former Black Panther, and so he was in shootouts with the police and the public housing in New Orleans back in the day. So he has this whole history of organizing. So he pulled his resources together. He got all these little like white kid volunteers that came from colleges, and they squatted on people's properties in the lower Ninth Ward until those people could get back so the city would not take their houses away. He organized that. He organized environmental remediation. And so much of the story that I think has gotten overlooked, because the big story was like, oh, America showed up to help, but everybody came to help, is that people were helping themselves. And that so much of that recovery effort and the knowledge of what was needed to recover came from the people themselves. The very last thing in our series is in the lower Ninth Ward, which is just, it is infuriating if you go. It looks just like Katrina happened last year in the lower Ninth Ward. And this is a community of homeowners, and that is generations of Black wealth that were wiped out and never came back.
Right, and,
yes.
and people have the misconception that, these are people who didn't have anything poor. But
that
they
is not
own
true.
their homes.
Yes.
Homes have been in their family for generations,
Yes.
since the 1800s, that they cannot get back because they weren't covered by insurance.
Yes.
Or, which is why you have 200,000 people who could not return.
Yes, and there was also just racism in the recovery.
Environmental racism,
Yeah,
right?
well, there was environmental racism, but there was a program called the Road Home that was meant to give free money, basically grants to people who didn't, between the shortfall between FEMA and the insurance to cover it, but they tied the money to the pre-Katrina value of your home. And so we know, because of housing discrimination, that like the presence of your Black self in your house devalues your house. And so as a result, drywall costs the same wherever you're gonna get it, but people who lived in the white part of town were more likely to have their rebuilding costs covered than the people who lived in the lower Ninth Ward. And so therefore you had so many more Black people that just could never come back because they could not afford to rebuild, because they couldn't get the money just because the presence of their Black self in their house.
It's amazing, amazing.
One thing real quick,
Yes.
talking about the Ninth Ward, one quick story is we had a guide that kind of took us around. And, what you said is heartbreaking to see that nothing's been done. But the guide, I didn't know he was from the Ninth Ward. He just was like, I'll take you wherever you need to go. Because he was taking me all around the city. And so he goes, oh, my house is over here. I was like, oh, you live in the Ninth Ward? He said, yeah. So we pull up to his house, and there's nothing there. It's just 3 steps. And he said, the only way we knew it was our house because our steps are green. So I knew because everything shifted. So nobody knew where the property lines were, but he knew these are my steps. And it was just heartbreaking to
Block after block after block.
block
just
after block
steps.
after just steps.
20 years later.
20 years later,
It's amazing. Ryan, the word rebirth was highlighted in your film. What does this word mean to you as it pertains to rebuilding, either infrastructure, systems, or the spirit of the people?
Well, I think the first thing is, to me, rebirth is sad, right? Because in order for something to be reborn, it has to die. And it's very seldom that's going to come back the exact same way. And I think that's the sadness in it. And then the excitement, the happiness, the rebirth part, the part that we're still here, is that the people of the city still have joy. They still have hope. They still have each other, right? They still have this connective tissue that makes us proud to be where we're from. If you go to Louisiana, or if somebody from New Orleans is in, let's say, New York, and you say, hey, where are you from? They're gonna say New Orleans. And you might be like, Louisiana? They'd be like, no, I'm from New Orleans, right? It's not the same place, right? New Orleans is its own separate place, its own separate people. But just in speaking about some of the lasting effect of what Katrina was emotionally and mentally for these people, that is an abnormal amount of morbidity to have to see, right? To have to move dead bodies, to have to attempt to save people, to have to clean out homes where there are children and old and elderly people who have passed. Like, that is not something you ever forget. And so there are people, you can have all the block punts in the world, you can have all the Super Bowl wins you want, they are still stuck there, right? Like, you have to imagine, and you talk about the fact that they took care of one another. They took care of one another their entire lives. It was your auntie lived around the corner and your cousin lived down the street. And New Orleans is segregated by race, but it's also segregated by money, right? Like, I can live places in New Orleans and go places that other people can't, or that other people can't afford. And then sometimes you also have to realize there are people who find a way to make enough money, but they're also taking care of so many other people that they stay in the same places. And those people couldn't even come back. I grew up with 3 best friends, and we did everything together, right? We went to every high school dance. They came to every football game I played at LSU. None of them live in the city anymore. Everybody moved. And none of them had an opportunity to come back. And I think, for as excited as I am to talk about the rebirth of the city, getting the chance to sit with people and talk about what it was like before Katrina, it just made me sad. And my pops, I don't know why he's not the mayor at some point. He should be. And
Maybe you can work on that.
Yeah, y'all don't want that though. One of the most beautiful opportunities or beautiful things I got to do was, my dad's in his kitchen in the house that we've rebuilt 3 times inside, and my daughter's sitting at the counter, and we are talking about 3 different generations' perspective on what New Orleans is. And all of it is marked by August of 2005. And so I think that was the beauty of getting to tell this story.
In sticking on the theme of rebirth, because you said in the film that that was a word that was special to you, how did the return of the New Orleans Saints in the Superdome play a role in that rebirth?
So I'm not a Saints fan. Never. I just never was. Growing up, people wore bags on their heads. That was the Saints I knew probably until the Dome Patrol. And imagine being in the NFL, playing in a different city, and cheering for a team. I knew what Reggie Bush and Drew Brees and Tracy Porter and all of these players who play for the Saints, I knew what they meant to my family. My sister, I don't think my sister owns a Pittsburgh Steelers jersey, but she got a ton of New Orleans Saints jerseys.
I can't believe that.
I'm just being honest. And we look exactly alike. And and so
That's a lot of shade. Right?
but for me, like, that says a lot about what this team meant to the city. And they didn't have a ton of money in '06 when they came back, and people didn't have their homes back, and they didn't have the lives that they had before the levee broke, but they had that team. And for the Atlanta Falcons, who everybody knows, if you are a New Orleans Saints fan, you hate with a passion. For that to be the team that you play that night, for Steve Gleason to block that punt, it was truly like God said, I'm going to give y'all something.
Yes.
And it was
Yes.
something that night.
And I felt that in watching the film. Absolutely. Julian, talk about the decision to wait until closer to the end to have stars like Drew Brees featured in the film and talk about that experience from that night. Can you take us through that, that process?
I mean, they were where they were supposed to be, they weren't there during Katrina, they came after. And so, you got to tell the true story. I could have put them in the front, I could have put them in the open, say, oh, look, Drew Brees, respected, Sean Payton, but, it wasn't about them. They played a vital role in giving the city hope and giving the city, a breather. But, I have to tell the true story about what happened. And the true story is really about the people and the culture before they got there.
That's right.
So,
Right. So let's stick on Superdome. It is a sports sanctuary for New Orleans Saints, people of New Orleans. It was also a building that held so much trauma. Tracy, can you take us through what it was like for you to interview participants for this project, this series, and discuss some of the examples of residents who did return back to New Orleans and what drew them back to the city?
So what it was like for me, it was emotional for everybody. It's funny because I get this question a lot of like, oh, how was it? It was such a difficult story and whatever. And I just really go back to the courage and the grace that the people who were in the film had to agree to revisit what is like the most profound trauma of all of their lives for the sake of the truth being told. I don't think there was a single interview where there weren't tears, like mine and theirs. And it was unsettling, and it is unsettling, but that also feels appropriate. Like, you shouldn't be able to walk away from the experience of this story and not have something like stick in you that feels uncomfortable and unsettled. So it feels appropriate that we all feel that way. And then what was the other?
Just what it was like for them to return.
Oh, what it was like for the return. So everybody wanted to come back. Part of the story that we tell is the housing story of New Orleans. The rent, one of our people in there is one of the Mardi Gras Indians who are really at the foundation of the culture of what New Orleans is. And as he says in the series, like, we built all these raggedy houses in this city and y'all treat us like this. And he wants to come back and live in New Orleans. And we filmed his very last Mardi Gras because he can no longer afford to live in New Orleans. What a house that you would have rented for $5,000, now some other people have come and now that is an Airbnb, or that rent is $2,000. And so the people that made the city what it is cannot afford to live in the city anymore. And it is a story of gentrification that we're seeing it a lot of. It's happening where I live in Brooklyn, where I'm from in DC. But Katrina turbocharged it in a way. And like every level, even the public housing that was in New Orleans, those were very old buildings that survived the storm, but there had been a desire to get them people out before the storm happened. And so Katrina was used as a pretense. And so they emptied out all of the public housing and demolished it. And those people and they built mixed use, mixed income housing, but it wasn't a one-to-one match. So if you got kicked out, it wasn't like you were guaranteed an apartment. And then we've discussed what happened to sort of the homeowners and why a lot of them weren't come back. So everybody wanted to come back, but for those reasons, some people weren't able. But for the people who could, I feel like they are doubly committed to preserving the New Orleans that they knew. Like Lunette Boutte, who is the blonde lady. You see, okay, you're gonna ask me about Lunette. Okay, do you want to?
Yeah,
wait, we'll circle back to Lunette. Okay.
Yeah, I'll ask.
Can I just say one more thing too, though?
Yes.
There is a sense for some people, and I don't know, I haven't seen the docuseries. There's a sense for some people in our city that the storm did the dirty work that they were already intending to do. Right? There were groups of individuals, and there were a certain section and type and race of people and socioeconomic class of people that they didn't want there anyway. Right? And the storm did some of the work for them. And now they were able to move forward with things that they already intended to do, but now you can do it under this cloud that Katrina did it. And I don't, and I'm sure that you're serious, and I can't wait to watch it. I'm sure that it doesn't miss that point. Yeah. And I think there was always, throughout every interview, when we started to, and when you asked Julian about why they are last, it's because they should be, but our piece also evolved. Right, the conversation around what we were going to show and what the final edit would be, it evolved as we went along. Like you had a conversation, somebody finally said, but that game. And then somebody finally said, but the block punt. And then somebody finally said, and when they won the Super Bowl. But much of our early conversation wasn't about that. And I think that's why when you do watch the documentary, you'll see, okay, this part happened after, but it took all of these things to happen and all of this tragedy for that one very minuscule sports moment to mean what it meant for an entire city.
Right. Strength, hope, resilience of a people, right? And I'm going to take us through another trailer, but just to stick on those themes, you have, showcasing the spirit of the Crescent City as the Saints returned for their first home game in September of 2006. And Tracy, to your point, people who wanted to come back but didn't have anything to come back to or couldn't afford to come back to what they had left, you had business owners, though, like Lunette Boutte, who you will see in the docuseries, who refuses to let her business go. Yes. And she's staying steadfast that they're not going to take it from her. Yes. So let's roll those clips. That's strength and determination and hope. So I'm going to ask each of you, what makes you hopeful for New Orleans today, and how has working on these projects changed you?
I got to go first?
Yes, I'm looking at you first.
This is redundant, but it's the people. Yeah. As long as there's people like Ms. Lunette who are still there, and there are, that is where I put my hope in for the city. I say this, and I mean it, and I will stand on this. New Orleans people are just the best people. They're just the best. They're just the best. And everything that the city is, that we know it to be, it lives in them. And there's so many people there. I mean, we didn't get into this, but there's like a whole environmental justice story, and so many of the people that are doing that work are the natives, the people who live there. One of the stories that we tell at the very end, that's actually a hopeful story about the lower Ninth Ward, is that there was a bayou that had been there for years next to the lower Ninth Ward, and there's a whole, I won't get into the backstory of the environmental justice story. Y'all watch it.
You gotta watch it.
But the point is that after Katrina, the community got together and restored this bayou, and this place is acting as sort of a natural watershed. So now when there's flooding, the water disperses and it reduces the likelihood of the kind of flooding that happened in Katrina. And that's something that the people they got together on somebody's porch a year later and were like, we're gonna do this, y'all. And they figured it out and got money from the government and all of these things and partnered with. And by the way, that's something that FEMA learned afterwards, is that they need to take the guidance from the community, because the community knows what they need in order to figure out how to rebuild moving forward. So, I mean, my whole hope for the future of New Orleans is in the people of New Orleans. That is the government, no. The people, yes. So they're just my favorite people. They're the best people. I just love New Orleans and the city so much. So I guess that's how I was changed. Because I knew New Orleans as a tourist before, but I very intentionally told our team we're not filming in the French Quarter at all on this series. And so I got to know the city for real. Like, we were in every single ward, every single neighborhood. And so that is what changed me. Is like I have a different kinship and relationship to New Orleans and the people after working on this series.
Thank you. Julian, how has this working on your film changed you, and what gives you hope?
It gave me love for the city. I mean, my dad's from New Orleans. For whatever reason, I never connected to New Orleans. You know, my dad moved from New Orleans to Los Angeles, and he would always talk about it. We would always have gumbo, but I never went back, you know, or I never went there. And so this was the perfect opportunity for me to connect with the city and connect with my roots. And I'm so grateful that I was able to do it. What I hope is, with both of these films, you know, somebody watches it and it's a call to action to really rebuild the Ninth Ward. Like, you know, we should rebuild it. And so that's what I'm hopeful for. And, you know, it was just a pleasure and an honor to work with Ryan and for him to be a part of this. You know, I don't know if I've ever thanked you, but thank you for being a part of this, man.
Yeah, I think they put it perfectly. It's about the people. People from New Orleans are sort of like delusionally joyful, you know, and I say that and it's such a compliment, and I say it with so much love. It's like the places that visitors go, that they're being served, right? And these people are providing a service. They actually wake up in the morning with the intention of making your day. And if you watch these movies, you'll learn that where they're coming from to service you and to give you a smile is not a place that you should be joyful to come from, right? And their job is to make you leave New Orleans and say to yourself, I want to go back, right? Or to say, I love these people. And so when you got to see all the buildings being rebuilt, even when they were able to go back into the Superdome, I want you to think about the people that make you love New Orleans and how many of those people only went in when they needed to find sanctuary from the storm, right? That they haven't gone to Saints games and they don't get to go to concerts, and maybe they'll find a way to get to go to the Bayou Classic or see a concert at Essence. You know, like what the city is the humans. And so many of those humans are still not back in a place that they actually built. And so what makes me hopeful is very much like the line in the trailer is like they couldn't drown it. They couldn't drown their spirit. Right? They couldn't drown their soul. And I think the soul of New Orleans still lives. And even in watching the clips and having the conversations, it's amazing that Katrina made me root for people that I genuinely do not like. You know? And they know it. I know it. Right? But in those moments when Tracy Porter, who is a very good friend of mine, he's like my little brother now, when he's running down the field in the Superdome after picking off Peyton Manning and he's pointing to the crowd, like I cried. Because for me, I was like, damn, a city that people treated like they couldn't do anything right, got it right that day.
Right. Thank you. And I'm not a panelist, but I'm just going to say my hope is for us to learn from the people of New Orleans about unity and what it means to take care of one another, especially now, right? It's very important that we first watch both of these films, but also take what these people endured during trauma and tragedy and how they stuck together to rebuild. We need to be doing that in our everyday lives right now. So that is my hope, is unity. And we learn from the people of New Orleans and their spirit, their strong spirit, their resilient spirit. And we do the same in our everyday lives. I want to thank you, Ryan.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, Julian. Thank you, Tracy, for the work you poured into and making sure that you give the story back to the people of New Orleans and not let other people tell that story. Hurricane Katrina, Race Against Time, is now streaming on Disney Plus and Hulu. It is now ranked number 3 on Hulu, so we're depending on you to make it number 1. And please watch Above the Tide that airs August 11th, that's Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time on ESPN and streams on ESPN Plus same day at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you so much for being here. Truly enjoyed you.